So here's something that's been bothering me. Not in a bad way, though. More like where you keep circling back to it in the middle of the night and you're like, why does this keep coming up in my mind? Owls. Specifically, why so many completely unconnected cultures decided that owls meant someone was about to die. And I know. I know that sounds like the opening to a nature documentary or some kind of folklore trivia video. This is not what that is. Because the owl is honestly kind of besides the point here. What's actually interesting is the mechanism, the thing underneath the belief. The way a completely ordinary animal doing completely ordinary things somehow ends woven into the death mythology of cultures that never talk to each other. Because that's not really about owls. That's about us. And specifically, it's about something that creators and storytellers do constantly that we don't talk about nearly enough. But the first thing, the owl thing, because I don't want to just skip past it. So imagine you're living in a pre electricity village. No streetlights, no ambient noise. You got maybe fire inside, but just darkness outside. Like genuine, total, all consuming darkness. And at some point in the middle of the night, you hear the sound. And if you guys have never actually heard a barn owl screech, look it up right now because it sounds wrong. Like, it sounds like nothing that should be alive. It's this hollow, raspy, genuinely horrifying sound that cuts through the silence in a way that your entire nervous system just does not appreciate. And you hear it, and you don't know what it is. And then someone in your village dies the next morning. Coincidence? I think not. But here's the thing, and what I keep coming back to. There really is nothing connecting those two events at all, objectively. An owl screamed and somebody died, and those two facts just happen to exist within the same 24-hour window. And that's it. That's the entire chain of events. And your brain connects them anyway. Not because your brain is broken or superstitious or primitive. Your brain connects them because that's what brains are supposed to do. Pattern recognition is survival. And if you're in an environment where you might get eaten, well, noticing patterns, even false ones, keeps you alive. The cost of a false positive is low. The cost of missing a real signal is instant death. So, your brain flags the owl. And here's where it gets fascinating. Because the next time someone dies in the village, someone says, "Did anyone hear the owl?" And the answer might be yes or no. But either way, the question got asked. The connection is now active in the community's mind. It's out there. People are listening differently. The owl call that just used to be background noise is now categorically different. It has meaning. And this is the part that makes no sense if you think about it carefully. Or if you don't think about it carefully. The owl didn't change. The owl is doing exactly what owls do, hunting mice, defending its territory. existing in the dark because that's where their eyes work best. The owl has zero awareness of the fact that it has just become a symbol of death in your entire community. You changed. The story changed. The same sound is now doing completely different work. And nobody talks about the moment where information becomes narrative, because that's not the moment when something happens. It's the moment when somebody decides it means something. That's the threshold. And I keep coming back to it because it shows up everywhere in storytelling, in every medium, in every format. And creators keep ignoring it or completely botching it. Because what actually happened in that village isn't the owl warned us. It's more that two unrelated events got edited together in someone's memory. And that edit got passed down. And each generation inherited not just the belief, but the emotional architecture of the belief. And the tension, the dread, the listening in the dark, it's what everybody does now. Like a village elder who says, "I heard the owl last night," isn't necessarily lying or being irrational. They're transmitting a compressed story. Generations of compressed stories, actually, in a single sentence. Something bad happened and we heard this sound first. Repeated enough times that the pattern becomes reality. Well, to us. And this is what annoys me. When people talk about ancient superstitions, they frame it like, well, back then people didn't know any better. Like, it's about information. It's not about information. It's about the fact that randomness is genuinely difficult to live with, and stories are not. Because here's the thing. What does it actually feel like to not have a warning? Someone you love just dies. No signal, no preparation, no narrative logic. Just absence where there used to be a person. That's not how stories work, though. Stories build, they telegraph. They give you beats and signals and the creeping sense that something is coming. Real life does not do that. Real life has no obligation to make narrative sense. And that gap between how stories work and how reality works creates this persistent human hunger for omens. For something that says, this is a chapter ending, something is coming, be ready. Well, the owl in the dark becomes that. Not because it actually means anything, but because the alternative, accepting that disaster is random and unpredictable and could arrive at any moment with no warning, is genuinely unbearable. And this is where it starts to get dumb in how creators handle this idea. Because creators borrow this. Of course they do. Like the horror genre has been using owl sounds as atmospheric shorthand for as long as the genre's been around. You're watching something scary. You're in the dark woods. You hear an owl, and your brain immediately goes to someone is about to die. Which is wild because the owl is doing nothing. The owl is not a character. It's not a threat. It's just there. But it works. And it works specifically because the sound is now loaded. Centuries of humans building meaning into that particular noise means that modern audiences carry that weight without knowing where it came from. And that's interesting to me as a creator, because what's actually happening is the audience arrives preloaded. Like, you didn't build that emotional response, you inherited it. All you did was point at it. But this is where people mess up. They treat that inherent meaning as a shortcut instead of a foundation. Like, owl sounds scary. I'll put an owl in my story. Done. And then the owl does nothing else. It just sits there being ominous, and then the plot moves on and the owl never mattered. That's not atmosphere, that's just decoration. Let me back up a second because I want to talk about the cultural spread of this thing, because that's where it gets genuinely weird. So, independently, cultures across North America, Sub-Saharan Africa, parts of Asia, Europe, Mesoamerica, well, they all developed owl as death symbol traditions. Like, they didn't share notes. There was no universal owl death memo. And the obvious explanation is, okay, so owls are nocturnal and death is associated with darkness. So it makes sense. And okay. That's part of it, though. And it's not the most interesting part, in my opinion. Because the most interesting pattern is that owls trigger something specific in human perception that other nocturnal animals don't. It's not the darkness. It's the eyes. Like, owls have forward-facing eyes. Large, massive, in comparison to their body. Fixed, forward-facing eyes that look... And I'm sorry, but this is just true. But they look uncomfortably human. Like, they don't have the skittish behavior of most birds. They don't dart away when they notice you. They stare. Like, they track. They turn their heads slow, deliberate, almost in a mechanical way. And I think on some deep pattern recognition level, a human brain in the dark, noticing something with forward-facing eyes that is watching them, well, obviously they're immediately going to go predator. Because, I mean, yeah, it just, even though owls don't hunt humans, even there's no actual threat, the shape of the interaction, the contact, the stillness, the being watched, that triggers something ancient. And that's what nobody's talking about. Like, the feeling of being watched is not neutral. It's never neutral, even in situations where there's no threat. The sensation of being seen by something creates a very specific kind of awareness. A heightened alert, if you will. Somebody is paying attention to me feeling. And that feeling, that's story energy. That's the feeling right before something matters. Hmm. Hmm. Interesting. Because this is what I keep thinking about from a craft angle. The owl didn't cause anything. It didn't do anything. But its presence changes the state of everyone around it. The village isn't more in danger when the owl calls, but the village feels the danger. Everyone listens differently. Everyone is interpreting what's already happening through a new lens. And that is, well, if you think about it, that's the mechanic of dramatic attention right there. Like, you're not describing danger, you're describing the feeling that danger is near. And those are completely different things. And I think a lot of creators mix this up. They think tension means something bad has to be happening or is about to happen. But the owl thing is proof that you can create unbearable tension with an animal that is doing nothing more sinister than hunting the local mice population. See, the tension is the interpretation in the waiting, in the community that is now trapped between probably nothing and what if it's not. That's the story right there. The gap is the story. And here's where it falls apart for most people trying to use omens or symbols in their work. They put the symbol in, and they make something bad happen. Owl screams, person dies. Crow lands on a fence, death follows. Rain on the wedding, you know the rest. And technically, you've done the thing. Omen, event, connection made. But you skipped the actual interesting part, which is the between. The period after the omen and before the event where every single person in your story has to sit with what they think it means. Does the skeptic dismiss it? Do the elders prepare? Does the community fragment between believers and non-believers? Does someone make a decision based on the omen that then causes the disaster through a series of completely rational steps that had nothing to do with the owl? Because that last one, that's more based in reality. That's something that genuinely happens. The community hears an omen. They believe it means death. They make decisions based on that belief. Those decisions cause consequences. And then someone dies and they say, see, the owl was right. Which actually, it's more like the owls created the conditions for what came next. Not through some supernatural mechanism. It's just through fear. Through story logic taking over rational decision making. And I think creators know this. But the execution gets lazy because it's easy to get from omen to disaster without spending any time in the middle where the actual drama lives. Okay, but let me get to the Athena thing because it completely reframes everything and I don't want to skip it. So, ancient Greece. Owl. Not death. Not doom. Not warnings from the underworld. Wisdom. Like, the owl was Athena's symbol. The owl of Athena, the little owl on the Athenian coin. Wisdom, strategy, knowledge. The owl represented all of that to them. Which at first sounds like a contradiction. Like, how do you get from death omen in every other cultural tradition out there to symbol of wisdom in ancient Greece? But it's not actually a contradiction. And this is the part that makes me want to flip the tables. Because the owl represents the same thing in both traditions. Darkness, seeing in the dark, knowing what's happening when everyone is blind. In one framing, that's terrifying. In a different one, it's power. And the only thing that changed is the cultural decision about whether the unknown is a threat or an advantage. Which is wild because that's not a story about owls at all. It's a story about whether a culture orients towards fear or mastery in the face of uncertainty. And that tells you something about Athens, not about owls. Mm-hmm. So, so what does this have to do with you making stuff? Well, here's what I think, and I could be wrong, but I think the real reason owl symbolism spread across so many different cultures isn't the darkness or the eyes or even the death association specifically. I think it's the sound arriving before the thing itself. Like you hear an owl long before you know what's happening. You don't see death coming. You don't see disaster building. You just hear something in the dark that your gut tells you is wrong. And then you wait. And the waiting, the anticipation, that's where the fear actually lives. That's where a story lives. And this is where people mess up in a really fundamental way. I see it constantly in games and film and YouTube narrative arcs and serialized fiction. Creators confuse the event with the tension. The event is the owl screaming. The tension is the 3 days afterwards when nothing has happened yet. But everyone in the village is listening. Or flip that. The event is the character dying. The tension is the 2 episodes before that where something just feels off. Where the music is a half step too low. Where the character makes a decision that's not wrong, but also not quite right. Where the audience's gut says, oh no, before their brain knows why. That's the owl. That's the whole thing. And the uncomfortable version of this, the mechanism, the pattern recognition that hears a sound and builds a story around it, that's also how misinformation spreads. That's how moral panic works. That's how conspiracy theorists get traction. Because a conspiracy theory is just an omen that becomes a belief. Someone notices a pattern. That pattern gets passed down. People start listening differently. Certain events get filtered through the new framework. And now every piece of information is evidence because the story existed first. And the facts are fitted into it after. And I'm not equating ancient owl mythology with misinformation campaigns. I'm just saying the mechanism is the same. The brain's drive to connect unrelated events through narrative is neutral. Like it creates folklore and propaganda and your favorite story and a lot of things we probably would rather not have. And I think creators understand this. Those who really understand how quickly an audience will build a story from nothing. Well, they're working with a very different toolkit than creators who are just trying to explain things clearly. Because the village didn't need anyone to explain what the owl meant. They already knew. They built the explanation themselves over generations, and they all inherited it fully formed. So what's the closest thing to that in your format? Like, what's the thing that you can point to at and say it carries the weight? And then just let the audience existing story machinery do the rest. Because that's what happens every time a horror film uses an owl call and it works. They're not building meaning. They're redirecting that meaning that already exists. And filmmakers who use this versus the ones who use owl sounds just because it's in the sound effects pack, well, they're fundamentally making different choices, even if the end result sounds identical. Okay, so here's something I want to push back on. Because it's not, well, because there's a version of this that sounds really clean and useful, and it's so totally not. Because the version is use symbols that carry preloaded cultural meaning and let your audience fill the gaps. And okay, yeah, to some extent, that's good advice. But, as there's always a but with this context, it falls apart when you're borrowing weight from a cultural context that's not yours. And I'm not making a political point about representation. I mean, well, okay, so the point is also real, but that's not where I'm going with it. I'm talking about the craft issues. Like, if you borrow a symbol without understanding the mechanism that makes it work in that culture, well, you get decorations. You get an owl that screams and nothing happens, and the audience sits there going, okay, was that supposed to mean something? Because the symbol without the tension behind it is just an image. It's just vibes. And for example, the village elder who hears an owl isn't scared because of the owl. She's scared because she changes her behavior. Because she starts preparing for something. And the community starts reading her preparation and adjusts their own behavior. Because the omen carries a ripple effect of action and reaction that builds before anything has ever happened. Take the owl of that and replace it with a crack in the ceiling, and you still have a story because the mechanism is intact. Put an owl in without the mechanism, and you have a sound effect with some feathers, and that's it. And I keep seeing this, in games especially, but honestly everywhere else, where creators go for the symbol and skip the architecture. The omen lands and nothing responds. The characters don't change, the world doesn't shift. The audience gets the signal, but there's no reason to propagate it though. And this is where the ancient Greek thing matters to me in a craft sense, not just a cultural one, because the owl as wisdom framing isn't decorative either. If you think about it, like Athena's owl isn't just a cute furry mascot. The owl sees in the dark. That's the logic. Wisdom isn't about knowing more than everyone else in the daylight. It's about being able to navigate when information is limited, when the uncertainty is high, when everyone else is working blind. And that's okay. That's a genuinely interesting character idea. The person who is afraid of the dark soon becomes not afraid of the dark because they've built the ability to see in it. Cool concept. The skeptic who dismisses the owl almond is often framed as a fool. The rational one gets proven wrong. But the Athena framing, well, it gives you a different character entirely. The person who hears the owl and doesn't fear it because they understand it. Not because they're dismissing the uncertainty, but because they've learned to function within the symbol. And I think that is a character that is almost never written well. Because creators tend to frame rationalism in stories as arrogance, kind of. The character who doesn't believe in the almond usually gets punished for it, which is satisfying, but also dishonest, because it suggests that the lesson is to believe in all the almonds in the world, when the actual lesson, if there is one, is closer to the people who navigate uncertainty best aren't the ones who have more certainty. They're the ones who've made peace with having less. And now people are treating uncertainty itself as proof that the story is deep. That's a newer thing, I think. That's a response to an era of prestige television and complex storytelling where ambiguity is a style choice rather than an honest reckoning with how messy shit can be. It actually is. Where the owl screams in the credit rolls and everyone discusses it on Reddit for weeks on end, and the showrunner says something vague about the themes, and then the next season either explains it or ignores it completely. And both of those outcomes are the wrong lesson from what the owls actually taught people. Because the village doesn't live in ambiguity forever. They interpreted, they acted. Sometimes they were wrong and they kept the story anyway. They built a system for moving through uncertainty that was functional even when it wasn't accurate. The story didn't have to prove to be useful or have to be true as well. Which is a weird thing to say in 2026. A weird thing to land on. But I think about that a lot, actually. When I think about why stories matter to people at all. They're not accurate. They're not supposed to be. They're systems for moving in a world where you cannot know what's coming. Where you hear something in the dark and have to decide what to do before you know what it means. And the best stories in any medium are the ones where you can feel that mechanism working. Where the audience is the village. Where they hear the owl and now they're waiting. And the worst ones are where the owl screams and everybody just moves on with their lives. Like nothing is going on at all. Anyway, I don't know. I keep thinking about that moment right before anyone knows what's going to happen. The whole village sitting in the dark after the owl call. Nothing is different, yet everything is different. All that changed was that they're paying a new kind of attention. That's the point. That's the whole thing, I think. So, yeah, anyway. If this made you think, like the video. Subscribe if you want more stuff like this. This is WriteSparky, and I will see you in the next video.